Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet another trek through Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We're on Volume 15, Chapter 8, and yes, things heated up. I was going to say things are heating up, but no, things literally just, it happened. It all kind of happened. These two chapters, honestly, go really well together, having pretty much the entire battle throughout these two chapters, and it was crazy. And, spoiler, at the end of it all, I'm happy with how it ended. I was very pleased with how it happened. Now I have a sort of a, I don't know if I want to say major, because whenever I make like these really heavy words, everybody gets super crazy and thinks that I'm not acknowledging the opposite side of it. But there is one critique that I will give how it kind of wraps up. But until we get there, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Thanks to everybody that dropped by for the premiere. Hey chat, hope you guys are doing well. Thank you so much for dropping by as always. And as per usual, yes, greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel monetarily through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, all that stuff. It means so much to me. It keeps this stuff going. But yeah, as usual, before we get started, my usual stuff that came to mind as I was doing my editing of the previous Mushoku Mondays. This is kind of a regular thing now, but yeah, I spent a lot of time talking about how the man god knew about the fighting god's armor. And this has sort of been something that's constantly kind of been being bumped around in my head as to what that means. And yes, technically the aspect of the fighting god's armor in general. It seemed like based on the man god that the fighting god's armor was very similar to Rudeus. He was talking him through this whole process. And yes, at the time I was theorizing the idea that there was a possibility that the man god is somehow Rudeus in some way and thus already seen it happen before, thus knows how that armor worked. But as I was editing, I sort of had the theory pop in my head of the possibility of the man god being tied in with the fighting god in some way. Now, at the time that I was editing before I read these two chapters, yes, the initial theory that popped in my head was, what if the man god is the fighting god? Because yes, back here, we had a little bit of a acknowledgement of revisionist history once again, the idea that Kishirika said that the big gap in the continent was created by the dragon god and the fighting god fighting. Now, it could just be the fact that the dragon god, you know, bumped into the fighting god and they fought and this explosion happened, because we're obviously seeing the fact that once the dragon god gets to fighting, things hit the fan. But what if the dragon god was actively trying to defeat the fighting god in general? That opens the door to two possible theories. The initial theory that I had was, is the man god the fighting god? And that would make sense, because if the dragon god ran into the fighting god, he's going to destroy him. And this big explosion happens and crazy stuff happens. Now, the thing that happens in Chapter 9 throws a wrench in that. In the idea that when the dragon god mentions Rudeus' armor, he says the fighting god's armor. Now, if dragon god knew that the fighting god was the man god, he would probably say the man god's armor. I don't see him saying it's the fighting god's armor. But that still opens a door to the second theory, and the idea that what if the fighting god was deemed by the dragon god as one of the man god's apostles? If for some reason, maybe the fighting god came to him to kill dragon god and immediately knew, oh, you're working for the man god. And yes, that plays in the idea that if the fighting god is an apostle of the man god, or at least actively talking, that would be why the man god would know about the armor itself. So that all ties in. So it makes me believe that the fighting god is either the man god, which I don't think is anymore because of what dragon god says, or the fighting god is at least working for the man god, and that's probably how he knew about how to make the armor, and thus that's how Rudeus was told about the armor. The next thing is, I was talking a lot about how Rudeus pretty much learned everything about his skills in fighting pretty much originally from Paul, obviously. But I like the fact that he's still constantly using that knowledge. Like every time he fights, his style of fighting itself was created by fighting Paul. Paul was ruthlessly fighting him, and Rudeus had to figure out ways to push him away, move three-dimensionally, using his magic. But a thought occurred to me, and I don't know if I've ever thought of this before. I probably have. I want to say that I have. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned on Mushoku Mondays. A thought occurred to me in the idea that I wonder if that was also of negative effect to Rudeus. Why has Rudeus never been able to create a battle aura? Maybe it's because he never exercised to do it. He never worked his body to do that. He was always relying on his magic rather than his battle aura to produce speed, to produce evasion, all that kind of stuff, to produce his own strength. So the possibility that that reliance on his own magic is essentially what caused him to have those problems. Now, they have mentioned the idea that not everybody is going to be able to produce one, and maybe he could still produce one to this day, despite the fact not doing it before. I mean, why would Bodyguardi even try to help Rudius produce one if age had something to do with it? So it might be an inherent thing that he could never be able to produce it. But it was still an interesting thought. Next, yes, I admit I completely read right past it. I noted it when I was reading it the first time, but when I did the Mushoku Monday recording, I completely forgot about it. But yes, as the man gods was fading away from Rudius, as Rudius was waking up, yes, the man god kind of slipped out that I can even offer some advice in case your family ever found itself in a crisis. What? It's such an ominous statement. Like, it's so random. It's so specific. It's always those odd, specific things that get thrown in there that make you go, wait, why was that specifically brought up? What does the man god see that would cause a crisis to his family? And yes, why would he say that knowing that Rudius is already going to go off on a branching path? There's one end of me that's already going, wow, I wonder if the man god already knows that Rudius is going to, like, these 2 chapters. The man god already seen what happens with these 2 chapters. He knows that Rudius is not going to defeat him and that he's going to possibly join forces. Or maybe he sees that, but that he's hoping that he pressed on Rudius enough that he might not accept Orsted's help. But it makes me believe that, yes, the man god sees something. The man god sees that there's going to be a crisis in his family, and what is that crisis? That's the big question mark. And what advice would the man god possibly have for his family? It just doesn't make any sense. So yeah, very, very curious what that is. And yeah, my last note that I made was also with the man god, in that he notes the idea that yes, this group came to kill him. One was Orsted. One person he didn't know. He didn't recognize them. Yeah, I was at the time theorizing that it possibly might be the love interest of Nanahoshi. But yeah, there's a possibility that it was Nanahoshi. Again, because the man god has never mentioned Nanahoshi. I'm still stuck on the idea that I don't think I've ever seen the man god mention Nanahoshi. And I hope that I didn't miss a chat where somebody was saying that, no, he mentioned it over here, and they're probably going to get mad right now. But again, I don't recall a moment where he's ever brought that up, which again makes sense because Nanahoshi doesn't age. What is the possibility that she lives all the way to that point? And yes, this is the timeline that he's seeing is the timeline that he dies, which would technically include the interference that Nanahoshi is going to produce, that at least from her theory. But anyways, that all said, let's get into it. Everybody's waiting. Yes, Chapter 8, Quagmire versus Dragon God. 2 days north by northeast from Shiraya, there was an abandoned village that was swallowed by a forest. Some 40 years ago, a magical catastrophe caused the local woods to expand rapidly. It was overrun and everyone relocated. Now it was inhabited by monsters and adventurers that came to hunt them down. Today, a man with silver hair, golden eyes, and a white leather coat was making his way to the village. He monitored his surroundings alertly, walking along calmly while checking a compass-like object. No monsters dared to get close to him. Even the fiercest creatures fled like frightened squirrels. Is this it? He reached the outskirts of the village, where the compass was pointing to. He paused and studied in silence for a moment. That was the thing when I was reading through this, I was like, what is the compass? Again, the question that I had in the previous Mushoku Mondays was, how was Nanahoshi going to lure the Dragon God? Obviously, she didn't go with Rudius. I mean, the assumption was that she was going to have, like, Petagoose send her to a location, but then the question mark was, how does she contact him? I don't know why I didn't consider the idea of her just having one of these magical implements, like similar to what Ariel had, in a way to kind of communicate to him. Why would she call me to a place like this? Stepping slowly and cautiously into town, consumed by nature, eventually he halted again. He was at the center of the town where a well would presumably be located. A conspicuous structure stood there. A tall, yellow cylinder of a building. It was the only thing with no trace of vegetation on it. By the condition of it, it was clearly constructed recently. He checked his compass, confirmed that it was pointing at the tower, and reached for the doorknob warily. Nanahoshi, are you there? The interior was plain. No windows or hallways. Floor oddly slick as if coated with oil. There was several burlap sacks and an incense burner up against the wall. Based on the scent in the air, the burner was in active use. I didn't think it was going to be an actual incense burner. I thought you said that it was a potion or something like that. A little bit, I don't know, maybe how Chapter 9 concluded, maybe that affected it. He didn't say that his throat was trembling. Rudius. Or Eris. Could be Eris. What is this place? He noticed a door in the wall straight across from him. Cautiously, but without hesitation, he strode over and reached for the doorknob. As he did, he felt a small prick of pain. Examining his hand, there was not a speck of blood. Am I imagining things? In the next room, the layout was identical, but given the slope, It appeared that he was on the ground. He was growing increasingly suspicious, but he proceeded forward. He ignored signs saying, "Please remove your footwear here." And, "All guests, please put on this hat." I wonder if that was the hat. Which hat, though? The one that drops... It would probably be the one that drops water on you. Just a way to distract him. Some doors were rigged with traps, so small they may have been intended for mice. He carefully avoided as he pressed on, eventually arriving at a strange room. It was tall and circular, with no ceiling. Looking up, he could see a slice of the sky. It felt as if he was standing at the bottom of a chimney. "What's going on here?" Dubious, he furrowed his brow, but the needle from his compass was pointing at the center of the room. A small box sat there, a single sheet of paper underneath it. He approached warily and looked at the paper. There was 2 words written on it: Man, God. He quickly snatched the box and flipped it open before a cloud of smoke burst from it. And that was the point in which I realized, yep, that one theory that Rudius was going to be fooling the man god and that actually went there to talk to Orsted is gone. We are going full out battle with Orsted. Any other theory that I had is gone. That's happening. And so yes, at this point, I kind of transitioned to, okay, is it going to be he fights and beats Orsted, or does he fight and lose against Orsted, but then joins Orsted, or possibly just flees? I just didn't really think that he was going to be able to flee. I was like, this right here is going to be telling. It's either defeat or be defeat and then join. Now, honestly, as it kind of played on, as this chapter ended, I kind of felt like that was it was very set up, but at the same time, very necessary. I think how this chapter ends and how it rolls into the next chapter is extremely necessary for a certain character, which I did like. But yeah, he found some use of that stupid box. He actually found use for that stupid box. He dropped the box and assumed a defensive stance before hearing a small metallic clink. A silver ring had presumably fallen out of the box. It blinked with a faint light. It was what the compass was pointing to. Nanahoshi. So this makes me believe that... There's 2 theories that I have here. One is that the ring is like Ariel's, that it's a way of communicating to Orsted whenever she needs Orsted. Or the other theory is that it just blinks, and based on the type of blinking, communicates to him what she needs. And so it's like Morse code. If it blinks like red or something like that, he knows, okay, she needs me over here. All right, I'll come over there and help her out. But it also seems like it's indicating here that it is a lure of some sort for him to be able to find where she's at. Reaching down for the ring, there was a great flash of light in the sky. The man instantly kicked the ground to jump to the side, but the oily floor caused him to lose his grip. A huge bolt of lightning slammed down on the dragon god Orsted. We then jump to Rudius' perspective. From his campsite above the village, Rudius stared down intently at the spot he lured Orsted. When he seen the smoke rising, he fired off a lightning with all the power that he could muster. Yeah, I didn't quite imagine what was kind of saying here. I was kind of figuring that he was kind of pretty close, like up on a hill nearby. No, this is kind of, how this kind of plays out, it kind of feels like Rudius is way out here. Like, he's way out here on this mountain or something like that. And there's like this small little village way down here, and he's just nuking it. He was confident it would hit as he prepared this several times. And he even coated the floor with vegetable oils so that he couldn't evade at the last moment. He knew it wouldn't be enough. Orsted was the strongest person in the world. A world that had monsters like Etoph. Yeah, technically, yes. Rudius has fought Etoph before, and he used something like a lightning spell on her, and it didn't really do anything. So he's like, okay, if it didn't do much to Etoph, and now here's the person that's way stronger than Etoph, I need to be careful. Jabbing his staff into the ground, he fed it Surge of Mana and cast Cumulonimbus. Rain and lightning began to fall. Pushing more mana into his staff, he could feel it dragging mana from deep inside him, and he let it do it freely. This time, visualizing ice, visualizing the stopping of every molecule at the center of the town, dropping the temperature rapidly. Frost Nova, a spell that he'd used many times before, but never with this much power and wide scale. Very true. I think typically whenever he uses Frost Nova, it's kind of in an enclosed location. Actually, technically, I think all the time that we've ever had Frost Nova really ever casted by him was when he was inside of the teleportation labyrinth. I don't think he ever really used Frost Nova outside of that. So yeah, I don't think he's ever have. Maybe I'm probably missing like 1 or 2 moments. But yeah, technically, no matter what, this scale, again, we're talking massive. Like, this entire area is being frozen. He's using so much freaking mana. It's insane. Which makes me really think that at this point, Rudius was already kind of failing. There's a side of me that, obviously knowing how this chapter concludes, I really do feel like right here is where Rudy's lost. He's not wrong for thinking that. He's right in thinking if I just unload on this location, I can get him. But what happens? In the end, it kind of turns into a brawl. And I think if he had more mana during that brawl, he could have possibly made it. Now, I'd argue that, yeah, in the end, as we kind of see things in Chapter 9, I don't know. I really don't know how the heck he would even beat him. But here it's kind of already kind of showing that, yes, he sort of sees signs that he did something to Orsted later on. But taking into consideration how much mana he used right here, he went for inefficiency for the sake of ending it quick, getting the surprise, and finishing off quick. And any logical person would think, like he says in a minute, this should have killed anybody. But it didn't. It was a spell that he'd used many times before, but never at this scale. Rain froze, and layers upon layers of ice formed rapidly, consolidating it to a single giant object. Finally, it reached the size of an iceberg, and he stopped. He wasn't done yet. He channeled mana into his staff to create a rock in the sky above the village. Ignoring mana cost, he expanded its size so it was too huge to evade before launching it to the ground. It slammed down in a fraction of a second, causing the ground to tremble beneath his feet. An instant later, a thunderous boom reached his ears, followed by wind and a shockwave. Shielding his eyes, he looked down at his handiwork. The iceberg was shattered, and 2/3 of the rock embedded into the earth. That is a massive rock that he's laying on the ground, and it literally, again, 2/3 of it is down on the ground. That means, yes, technically that it is underground, which would be where Orsted was at just a minute ago. It seemed impossible for anyone to survive that. Did I get him? There wasn't any movement. It seemed possible that it was really over. He certainly hoped for that. But an instant later, the rock shattered. Somehow, he could feel the man's murderous rage, even from this range. I'm sorry. You've all watched my last week's Mushoku Mondays. You know right here, I'm rooting for Orsted. Yes, this entire 2 chapters, I was rooting for Orsted. Now, when certain people shows up, I didn't want them harmed, but I was still rooting for Orsted. I wanted Orsted to win. So yes, that's why I'm happy how it ended. Orsted a badass. Somehow he could feel the man's murderous rage, even from this range. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Legs trembled weakly, and tears formed in Rudius's eyes. As soon as he could move, he jumped in his magic armor. Just as practice, he fed power to all the components and reached for his staff. It took no time at all, but somehow the rage was already growing closer. With his startup routine complete, he turned his focus to his next attack. Mana surged out from him, through his armor, and into his staff. He spurred the torrent with every intention of draining himself dry. He visualized a nuclear explosion, pointed his staff at his enemy. There was a brilliant flash at the center of the village, and a wave of heat and light swept across the ground. From the corner of his eyes, he could see the trees incinerating in an instant before a powerful shockwave hit him. His magic armor weighed several tons, but endured the heat and shockwave without trembling. Pretty awesome armor. I mean, I just got like this mental image of like Rudius sitting in one of those like those nuclear test set site, you know, whenever you see like the shockwave hit and then like suck back or whatever. And you just stand there and everything's kind of just blowing away. Looking at the village, there was a huge mushroom cloud. He couldn't see the ground clearly under all the smoke and dust, but he fed that spell enough mana to obliterate everything in its radius. It was probably the single most powerful attack he had used in his life. Yet, he couldn't stop trembling in fear. He could still feel that rage, and it was far, far closer now, approaching at a ferocious speed nearly on him. Clenching his jaw to stop it from rattling, he squeezed his shaking hands tightly. Then he placed his staff in its holder on his back. He then mounted his Gatling gun on his right arm and picked up his shield with his left. He paused to take a few deep breaths, realizing his throat was trembling. He forcefully suppressed his fear and anxiety rising up as he pointed his Gatling gun towards a cloud of dust rapidly approaching him. Rudius, this is what you call around and find out. Around and find out. Rudius needed to keep the initiative. He was done for if he let Orsted set the pace. Did he damage him? Did the poison on the door, traps, and aphrodisiac burner work? He put all the power that he could in those 4 spells. If it left him unharmed, it was hard to imagine that his Gatling gun would work. But did his spells even land? Surely he couldn't evade them. The area of effect was massive. From this range, he couldn't possibly have seen it coming, even with the Eye of Foresight. As he thought, a silhouette approached. Fire! He activated his Gatling gun with a command word. Mana flowed into it as it sent stone cannons at a ferocious speed. The whistle of them sounded like screaming as they cut through the air. The clumps of rocks slammed into their target, blowing away the dust that surrounded him, revealing a silver-haired man in a battered cloak, face covered in soot. Was he hurt? Did the spells do anything at all? Yes. Blood was trickling down from his chin, something like a burn on the base of his neck. Damage was minor so far, but he could hurt him. Their eyes met, his sharp, hawk-like gaze fixed on Rudius. He looked like a hunter who'd finally found his prey. He sidestepped in an attempt to escape the barrage of stones, as Rudius used his fully activated Eye of Foresight to anticipate Orsted's moves. He was incredibly quick, so he was seeing a number of blurry, overlapping possibilities. Still, Rudius adjusted his arm to cut off the attempts of retreat. The travel time of projectiles were virtually non-existent, but somehow Orsted evaded them as if he'd seen him coming, gradually approaching Rudius in the process. It's like slowly getting closer. I can totally picture this in the show. One step here, two steps there, glaring fiercely as a bird of prey as he closed the distance. Now and then, the stone cannon would graze him, causing him to merely grimace slightly. He seemed convinced that a direct hit would not prove fatal. He seemed to be completely unafraid. He's Orsted. Again, Orsted's a badass. From all appearances, Rudius' attacks were nothing special to Orsted. It was as if he fought things like this on a regular basis. Rudius felt differently. Orsted's zombie-like calm and focus was terrifying to witness. There was a growing sense that nothing would work on him. It was a struggle to not give in to despair. Still, Rudius was trying to convince himself that he was holding the advantage for now. Rudius matched Orsted's movements. Yeah, I think if I was Rudius at this point, I wouldn't have myself in this position. Again. But if I was Rudius at this point right here, it would be hard not to think, why am I bothering? Like, I just unloaded 4 of my most powerful spells ever. My Gatling gun is making him just grimace. What are my options left? I can punch him with my shield. I can stab him with this blade on here. That would be the only thing I would think of at that time. But then my thought process at that point would be, how do I even connect it? How do I even touch him with it? That's going to be the problem. Other than that, what else? What spells can I cast that I hadn't already at their max potential over here? It just comes down to, at that point, a strategy. Hoping that something happens. And he sort of alludes to this in a bit. And he was kind of talking about that quite a bit in the previous chapters. Just hoping that he messes up. All I can really do is just keep my balance and hope that he messes up at some point. Rudius matched Orsted's movements, moving back from his advances, and the opposite of his strafes. Anywhere he went, Rudius met him with a hail of stones. If Rudius could keep this up, he'd never get any closer. But then eventually, you'll run out of mana. He had the upper hand. It was just going as visualized. Eris attempted to ramp up the pressure by casting Quagmire beneath him, but at the same time, Orsted used Disturb Magic. The fully formed magic was reduced to chaos tangling by a sudden surge of external power. The spell began to fade into a meaningless cloud of mana. However, Ruiz forcefully reformed it, pulling the strands back to their proper place. He was capable of this now, after training himself while teaching Sylphie Disturb Magic. All the hours of practice had been worth it for this one moment. Finally, get to see that yes, he did pull it off. This is something that he even, this is volume 6 stuff. Way back in volume 6. He was practicing this. He wanted to learn a way, if I can't mimic the Disturb Magic, he was hoping that he'd find a way to get around it. In case something like that ever happened, this has always been Ruiz's way of thinking. If something defeats me, I want to learn how to use it. If not to attack somebody with it, just how to get around it so I can survive. Simple as that. And yes, he sort of alluded to the fact that when he was training Sylphie how to do Disturb Magic, that was something that he was trying to learn at that point as well. So it's cool to see that finally came to fruition. And yes, granted, it doesn't do anything anyway. The Quagmire itself doesn't do anything anyways, but at least now he has a way of getting around that. Now Disturb Magic, even though it is still a threat, and even later on, it still becomes a threat, even still. Like, he still is, like, almost overwhelmed enough that it still isn't able to be re-pulled together. There's a possibility that in the end, he's still gonna flub it, but at least he has that counter now. Orsted's eyes went wide with surprise. Was this the first time that he'd seen his Disturb Magic fail to, whoa! The instant his Quagmire turned the ground under Orsted to muck, Orsted used his own spell to override it, covering the swamp completely with earth and plate. Orsted raised his right hand and pointed out to Rudius, who quickly answered with Disturb Magic. Brilliant light blots out the world. A jolt of fear ran through Rudius. He paused his Gatling gun barrage for an instant and leapt to one side. I can see the world again. There was a sizable crater at the spot that Orsted had aimed. Rudius didn't even see the attack itself. Was it some kind of fire spell? Or maybe something stranger like gravity magic? That light just now, was that death? There was no time to think as Orsted was sprinting towards him, with one of his hands outstretched. Disturb Magic wouldn't work. Orsted could just counteract it. Rudius pointed his hands at him, channeling mana through both. Intentions were to stop Orsted with Gatling Gun while canceling spells with his Absorption Stone. But as soon as he did this, he realized his mistake. Orsted's spell didn't dissipate, but at the same time, the stone projectiles from the Gatling gun dissolved into clouds of sand. Again, he mentioned the idea that these projectiles are going out at an instant. Like, this is just, but it's literally a gun. And they're turning into sand. Like, it's literally dispelling them, so to speak. Or at least causing them to decay in a way. Orsted seized on this and closed in quickly. With his right hand outstretched towards Rudius, he pulled his left back to his waist before swinging it viciously towards Rudius' heart. Rudius tried to launch himself backward at full speed, but it wasn't quick enough. Orsted's fist slammed against the breastplate. A whistling sound filled the air as Rudius watched Orsted shrink in the distance with ferocious speed. Crashing and crunching noises came from behind him, and the world was full of dancing trees. So this is what it was like to be knocked into next week. As he thought that, he slammed into a huge tree, the sudden deceleration hitting him like a hammer. It felt like his internal organs were being smashed apart. His vision began to dim, but he recovered quickly. Cliff had carved a magic circle inside the armor to heal his wounds automatically. Already our first benefit for the fact that Cliff is alive, whereas wasn't the case with Oldius. Pretty cool little feature. I wasn't really quite sure about that, how that was going to play out, but yeah, pretty cool little feature. Looking down, Reese noticed the breastplate badly dented and nearly cracked in half. The crack was repairing itself, but it was painfully slow. Still, it protected him from one blow. It was a good thing that he made this particular part thick and strong. He's like, I don't want to donut again. he did that to me once before. He donated me, so I'm going to make sure that right here it's nice and I don't want this to happen again. Reese felt that familiar, murderous rage bearing down on him again. Orsted was rushing straight at him to deal the finishing blow. Quickly, he activated his Gatling gun and fired a hail of deadly stones at his direction. He dodged them nimbly and extended his right hand at him again. At this rate, the same results would repeat, and Orsted would pierce his chestplate. What were the options? Dueling with magic wouldn't work. He could cancel his disturbed magic, but the man clearly had the means of resisting magical damage, just like Moore. Reese didn't even know what kind of spells he was throwing at him. He was at a disadvantage in a range fight then. That meant he'd had to try his luck at closer range, trust his magic armor, and use raw strength. It was his only option left. Yeah, I like that realization that, wait, because I had the same feeling when that all happened. I'm like, okay, we're right back to normal. Like, we just reset. And Reese is picking up on that. Like, wait, what is it? Wait a second, deja vu. This is the same rotation. It's the same thing's gonna happen. I'm shooting at him, he's dodging around, eventually gets close, bam, I'm back on my back. Get back up, he's shooting at him, he's dancing around. Oh, okay, I don't want this to happen again. That last time hurt, and this next time, I'm not gonna be so lucky. Reese charged forward with a battle cry, using his Gatling gun to keep Orsted pinned down. Orsted pulled his right hand back to prepare himself. As Reese charged in with his shield to slam into him like a battering ram, Orsted assumed a water god style stance. The instant that Reese seen this with his eye of foresight, he swung his shield forward, stabbing in his direction with a blade mounted at the tip. As it did more damage based on how powerful the defenses were, it may work. Reese's body slammed in Orsted with a loud metallic clang. It felt like smashing into a wall, but Orsted was sent flying backwards. Blood sprayed from his arm, and his eyes were fixed on Rudius, burning with hatred and anger. It's so funny because it's like, again, initially my initial impression was that I wanted Rudius to go in there and at least talk to him first. Suss out his side of the story, maybe. But yeah, like I said before, the moment that letter was sitting there, it was like, no. Because even if he does later want to talk to him, right now, Orsted is like, this is for sure an apostle of the man god. He wrote his name on that piece of paper. And yes, it could be the fact that he's just being enraged by it. Orsted's like, I want to kill you so bad. Which, yes, I don't think he's ever really mentioned it, but there's a possibility that Rudius initially had the thought process of trying to make him super angry just to make him slip up. I can't see any other reason why he would write Man God on that paper unless he wanted Orsted to be infuriated and thus slip up. It's just kind of surprising that he never mentioned that. He's trying to trick him, he's trying to set a trap, but not that specifically. This was his chance. Rudius fired off a barrage of stones again, slamming into him in midair, tearing what remained of his clothes apart, revealing a bruised and battered body underneath. There were burns, cuts, and scrapes all over him. The stone bullets struck his exposed skin repeatedly, sending flesh spurts of blood into the air. Finally, Orsted smashed to the ground with a mighty crash. Rudius thought, I could do this. I could kill him, as long as I could land direct hits, my spells could do plenty of damage. Sure, the stones bounced off of him, but it tore skin and left him bleeding. Eventually, that would be enough to kill him.
It seems I have no choice.
Somehow, amidst the range and the noise of the bullets, Ruius heard him speak those words. Ruius got to phase 2. This is phase 2. Break bar just went off. It's phase 2. Noel Phantasm comes out. Oh, man. In that instant, the air went cold and Ruius' body shivered uncontrollably. Now, this is interesting. I didn't notice until this second time reading through. I assumed when I read this part that Orsted was using magic, like he's using a Frost Nova or something like that. But we never hear about any magic. He doesn't use magic. He simply draws his sword. It makes me believe that the sword, one, is the sword produced by like a cold spell. Is it some sort of ice summoning or something like that? An ice sword summoning? Is it a possibility that wherever he's drawing it from is like this void that goes to somewhere cold? What is producing the coldness is kind of interesting. His eye of foresight stopped seeing Orsted, despite him clearly being visible in his other eye. That's another very, very interesting thing. One, it makes me believe that either something of an aura is being produced that is disrupting his eye of foresight. Is that sword possibly drawing mana? And that's pulling the mana from Ruius, including his eye, thus he can't use it anymore? Or is it simply that the eye of foresight literally cannot see it? The depths in which, the range in which Ruius is looking, it can't see it. Like Orsted is going to move too fast, or is in a state of pure instincts that it can't see it. Similar to Rajerd. Rajerd overcame Ruius' eye of foresight because there was too many possibilities and Ruius couldn't see which one he would choose. If he was stuck to basically a certain style and constantly went this direction, never moved on a fly, that possibility would be singular. Before Ruius can make sense of what that meant, Orsted vanished completely. Goes on the theory of him moving way too fast. Suddenly, Ruius was struck with a jolt of terror. He wrenched his body into a rightward leap, just as there was a sharp clang from his left side. When Ruius looked over, he seen Orsted standing next to him with a katana-like sword in his hand. From all appearances, he had just finished swinging it. Ruius also seen the left hand of his armor sliced cleanly from his arm and slam in the ground. Grah! Before Ruius could react, Orsted let out a fearsome, ear-splitting bellow. The force left his body stunned and numb. It was vocal magic, the specialty of the beast folk. Damn, I love Orsted so much. Orsted's so freaking awesome. Oh man, that's so awesome. Yeah, makes sense. All known abilities and whatnot. It's gonna include the beast folks. And again, he pissed. Orsted's pissed right now. This is phase 2, which makes me wonder if there's more phases. Ruius wavered at the edge of unconsciousness, but at the very last moment, he managed to pull himself together and jump to the side. Orsted kicked off the ground after him, leaving a crater in his wake. As Ruius turned his Gatling gun towards him, Orsted sliced it in half with his sword. He was now closing in on Ruius, with his sword still low from his strike. Ruius immediately channels mana into his right arm, envisioning the strongest version of electric. He then swung his armored fist ruthlessly at Orsted's face. However, instead of striking home, his punch slid harmlessly away from his target. Orsted's sword had somehow pressed up against his arm, and behind him, electricity was crackling loudly through the forest, igniting the undergrowth and breaking large trees apart. He had redirected both his spell and his punch. The instant Ruius understood this, Orsted moved his sword slightly. Gah! The right arm of Ruius' armor fell to the ground, with his actual arm inside of it. I think every fight, Ruius is going to lose a limb, and eventually he's just going to be a torso. Ugh. The pain was overwhelming, but he didn't have time to grimace. Even as he followed through with the strike, Orsted was pressing the attack again. Ruthless. This guy does not back down. Ruius couldn't respond, and couldn't so much as brace himself. Orsted's kick caught him square in the stomach. A horrible metallic squeal rang in Ruius' ears as he was briefly lifted off the ground. All force of the attack pressed through his armor and to his body. Fluid from his stomach shot out of his mouth as tears filled his vision, and his rear landed heavily on the ground. Ruius raised the stump of his right arm towards Orsted to fire off a shockwave. Orsted swung his sword into the air as a boom rang out, but that was his only reaction to the attack. Orsted's foot smashed into his face. His neck creaked ominously, and a jolt of intense pain ran down from his head to his shoulders. Realizing he was now flat on his back, Rudius hurried to stand back up, only to find Orsted standing in front of him, sword held high. I was gonna die. Purge! Reflectively, Rudius screamed the command word, ejecting him from the armor as Orsted cut it in half. Rudius hit the ground hard, and his body tumbled for some time before coming to a halt. He couldn't see what Orsted was doing, but Rudius knew he was out of options. It was over. His whole body was racking in pain. The man only kicked him a few times with the armor, but it felt like he was pummeled with a bat for hours. His chest, stomach, arm, neck, back, all hurt. It was painful just to breathe, and he could barely even move. Rudius felt more exhausted than he'd ever felt in his life. Oh, is this what it feels like when your mana runs dry? It finally happened. It finally happened. Rudius has finally experienced depleting his mana. Now, granted, I don't know if that makes sense really, because technically, yes, Rudius several times has depleted his mana. He talked about that back in his hometown. He used to deplete his mana and he passed out. I mean, that was the whole thing where he embarrassed himself. He passed out and he wet himself and everything. And additionally, yes, every time he's training his figurines to build his mana pool, he's just kind of creating figurines all the way to the point that he's depleted. Now, yes, it could be that he is depleting to the point where he's really low, but this is like literally dry. Again, even also with the whole thing with the displacement incident, they were theorizing the idea that that was a pull of his mana, and that's why he was kind of tired over there. But yeah, this might be specifically dry, like bone dry, which is very interesting, and technically goes to a point here in a minute, which is super interesting. Orsted's eyes turned to him as he flinched in fear. My armor was gone. I had to run, or he'd kill me, here and now. Wait, my right hand. Where's my right hand? Gah! The kick landed before Rudius could see him move. Tumbling backwards, his body screamed in agony. Landing face down in the dirt, Rudius struggled to breathe. Turning on his back, a foot slammed down on his chest. Again, ruthless. Ruthless. A groan of pain forced itself from his throat, and his body was burning up. As something cold pressed against his throat, he glanced over to see Orsted's sword. God damn it. I'm really gonna die. All that, and it wasn't enough.
So it is you, Rudius Grey Rat. Last I heard, you'd settle down and start a family. Why would you come for my head?
I think the reason he knows that is Nanahoshi told him. Because yes, initially when Orsted was going to kill Rudius, it was Nanahoshi that stepped in. And what I would assume is that they traveled together for some time. Then Nanahoshi gets to the university. And then Rudius starts helping Nanahoshi. And she probably told Orsted at some point, yeah, he's got kids and everything. He's had a family and everything. And yes, it makes sense that only now he finally recognized him, because yes, he's been in that armor the whole time. The whole time they've been fighting so far, that Orsted has been near him, he's been in this big armor. It seemed that he didn't intend to kill him immediately. Maybe it was because he spared his life once before. Or maybe he knew that he wasn't capable of continuing to fight. The man god said,
So you're one of his disciples after all. Die then.
Orsted lifted his foot from his chest and raised his sword. He said, you're trying to destroy the world, and my descendants will help you kill him one day. Orsted paused.
What?
The man god told me he's fighting you because he wants to protect the world. He said that if I kill you, he won't hurt my children or my family. Oof, this hurts. This hurts. Rudius turned on his belly and reached towards Orsted's foot, clinging to it, rubbing his face against it. Rudius began to plead with him in a loud, desperate voice. That was all he could do now. Please, don't destroy the world. You can kill me, I don't care. Just don't take my children. Don't take away their future. Please, this is the first time I've ever been so happy. Please, just leave the man god alone. I'm begging you. Tears streamed down Rudius' face. He was a powerless failure, and now he'd even lost his dignity. He thought, pathetic. Just pathetic. What's the matter with me, damn it?
I can't do that, I'm afraid.
As he heard those words, Rudius bit ferociously at Orsted's foot. I know, like, super serious moment here, but I always have to throw in my joke random thoughts because I'm dumb. I almost thought that Rudius right here possibly got like an implanted tooth of the petrification syndrome, but I'm like, no, wait, that would require Orsted to be pregnant unless he's got some knowledge that I don't know. I'm sorry. It happens now and then with me. But yeah, that's a rough shot. And yeah, been pointed out to me by the mods that technically a very similar shot as in the first season anime adaptation with Paul and Rudius crawling towards him. But I don't remember. I seem to remember one of the legs was missing. Like he was missing a leg and a limb. But it was his right arm. I think in the anime, it was his right arm that was missing, not his left that was taken by the whole situation with the Hydra. Pretty cool little reference. They seem to do that a lot in the anime, which makes me very afraid of watching the show anymore. Raising his bleeding stump of a right arm off the ground, he channeled all his remaining magic into it in order to explode. If he had to die, at least he'd take this bastard down with him.
Stir magic.
A sharp kick sent Reese flying, and the mana that he'd gathered was dissipated from his focus breaking. If he used any more mana at this point, he knew he'd fall unconscious.
You may possess Laplace's aspect, and the massive well of mana that comes with it, but casting so many spells in quick succession will still drain you dry.
As he spoke, Orsted bent down and reached his hand towards him. I'm gonna die. He's gonna kill me. But if I die, he won't die. And if he doesn't die, then Lucy will, and Roxy, and Sylphie. I can't let that happen. I can't let him beat me. I have to win. But my body won't move, and I'm out of mana. Blood was pulsing steadily out of his severed arm, and his thoughts were growing vague and sluggish. The world was getting dimmer as Orsted's hand drew closer until it was all that he could see. Damn it all. I should have picked a name at least. Suddenly, Orsted leapt away. Looking up, Rudius found someone else had come between them. A tall woman, and dark pants, and stylish jacket. In her hand, she held a sword with a silvery blade. Her back was to him, but he could recognize her hair. It was wavy, came down to her waist with a vibrant and fiery shade of crimson. Sorry I'm late, Rudius. Eris Greyrat was standing in front of him. Eris is in the chat. Finally. I wish it would better circumstances, but finally. Oh, super hype moment. Super hype moment. Honestly, when I got to this point right here, I did it like a stop moment of like really thinking it. And as much as most people be like, no, go to the next chapter. There was a side of me that was like, I should have seen this coming. And again, I assume that Eris had to be involved. Eris has to be involved in this fight. No matter what, she has to. There's just been so much buildup on her being a part of this fight. I'm surprised it even took so long. But it does make sense. Again, this is all playing into what really should happen. Rudius feels like he doesn't want anybody involved. He's going to do it himself. He's going to try his hardest. He's going to dump everything on it. And unfortunately, yes, fail miserably. Orsted is just not normal. He's not normal. Rudius has always pointed out that he's not normal. This is not normal thing. And yes, that was it's been his struggle his entire life, is the idea of why bother getting that strong? Because you'll never reach the limits of people like the Dragon God, who's been around for forever. It doesn't make any sense to even try to reach that level. It's impossible. Rudius knew that was impossible, but he still did this because he was hoping, possibly, if I can just catch him off guard and just nuke, maybe it'll work. It's my only option. I have no choice. But this makes sense. In a thematic way, this makes sense. In order for Rudius, thematically, to bring Eris into the harem, if she does, I mean, I'm assuming still, this makes sense. What does Rudius say? Who does Rudius love? It's always women that come and save him in his darkest moments. This is Eris's step in the door. Thematically, this is Eris's step into Rudius's life. She has to come into the picture and save him from something horrible, essentially. But yeah, super massive hype. Super massive hype seeing Eris show up. So good. So freaking good. She's finally there. I could just feel it. Like, at the moment I seen that picture of her standing there, I'm like, immediately I'm thinking to myself, she's so freaking happy right now. She's so freaking happy right now. The thing she's been building up for so long, the thing that she's always been seeking, this moment, despite the fact that she's acknowledged, I can't beat him. I'll never be able to beat Orsted. And even the next chapter, she says, I can't beat him. This is still what she's dreamed of. This is what she's been working so hard for. It has to be so massively fulfilling for somebody to build on something for that many years and finally execute on it. Finally happening. And it's even more tragic in the idea of spending all that time and knowing you can't execute on it, but still going to execute on it despite knowing you can't. It's got to be relieving. Finally, I get to be here for him. I finally get to save his life. So good. So freaking good. But chapter 9, Berserker Sword King versus Dragon God. This is one of those kind of chapter titles where I'm like, yeah, I can see a lot of people not wanting me to see chapter titles. We've made it a clear point that yes, I never look at table contents. I don't even look at the opening pages. I don't examine the covers, them all. Yes, I'm going to still see, by picking this up, I'm going to see that there's people here. It's just I'm not looking at it. I don't know if that makes any sense to people. There's a difference between looking at something and really kind of examining it. But chapter titles are no. They're a big no-nya. And yes, opening images are always a no-nya. I learned that from Volume 6 after I watched the anime. Opening up Volume 6, I'm like, holy crap. I feel bad for anybody that is like, oh, yay, Volume 6 finally came in. Can't wait to read what's going to happen next. And they're like, holy crap, what happened to Rudius? Holy crap, turning point? What the it's like, it's all the spoilers are there. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it makes sense to the design of a book, but it doesn't make sense. But yeah, this is one of those ones where when I read it, I'm like, yeah, this is probably one of those chapter titles that people are like, don't read the chapter titles. Don't. But yeah, several days prior, Eris and Ghislaine arrived at the magic city of Soraya. The trip hadn't been easy. Here comes the answer that I was asking last Mushoku Monday. Eris was in such a great hurry that she took a shortcut in a forest and got lost, ultimately blundering into a nest of monsters, which took some time to slay. I'm kind of wondering if at some point somebody will mention, like, Rudius and all them make it back home, and then at some point, like, a passing comment of somebody like, holy crap, did you hear the dragon of the blah blah forest got taken out? Yeah, nobody knows who did it. It's like this like ecosystem impacting slaying of monsters happened, and nobody knows who did it, because she doesn't want to turn in the quest or anything or tell anybody that happened, because she's too busy to get to here. To top it off, they went to a nearby town where some thugs unwisely provoked Eris, leading to a scuffle, which made them a host of enemies, which led to another scuffle, which led to problems at the border, which they solved with violence again. It was largely Eris's own fault, but it made the trip take some time. So there you go. That answers why 2 months, 3 months, that doesn't make any sense. Still, the both of them spent some time as adventurers. During their journey, they eventually got back into the swing of things. And after entering the kingdom of Renoa, their progress to the city went relatively smooth. After arriving in Shiraya itself, they found everyone knew Rudius' name, and many in the guild knew where he lived. One helpful local even explained that his house was easy to spot, due to the creature from Begaret in the yard, and a peculiar-looking treant supposedly cultivated on the demon continent. The horny Groot is outside. I don't think I ever mentioned that. Like the last time they actually mentioned him, it was in the windowsill. So apparently at some point, they moved it, and it's big enough that you could see it. The house itself wasn't as big as Eris's old estate, but it was large enough to pass as an inn. The yard was spacious and looked like it could serve nicely as a training ground. I like it. She's already kind of noting like, oh, I can probably work, do my training there. She's already moving in. Like mentally, she's already moving in. While she discussed her impressions with Ghislaine for a while, Eris rather uncharacteristically was hesitant to step in through the gate itself. Instead, she stood directly in front of it with her arms folded. Classic Eris. Classic Eris. For a time, everything was quiet. Ghislaine said nothing, neither did Eris, her chin high in the air. She simply stared at the building before her. From all appearances, she was convinced Rudius would somehow sense her and come outside. Rumor of him throughout her journey ran through her head. He was said to have slain a stray dragon, defeated a demon king. As the most powerful mage of the university, he inspired fear and awe. But despite his arrogance and audacity, he was friend to the weak, and there were many comical stories about his odd behavior. In other words, he was a relatively popular figure. People struggled to describe the extent of his power, but hearing people praise him always made her smile, almost as if they were complimenting her. That is technically a thing in relationships, is on not a lot of cases. Yes, technically, praise to your significant others is almost praise to yourself. Like, yeah, you feel that in an extension. However, amongst all the rumors that she heard, it was most comical ones that really stuck with her. For example, the guy's crazy about his wife. You always see them shopping together on their way back from the university. I saw him grab his wife's butt at the market. She flipped out on him. He married this woman who looked like a kid, I swear. He has 2 wives already, and who knows how many he'll end up with. Not much of a pious guy, that's for sure. They were about his wives, in other words. Every time she recalled them, she frowned deeply. There's the answer to the question earlier. There's that answer to that question that I had last time, was why she was staring off into the distance, like what hurt her? And I thought that it could either be, yes, the fact that he has wives, or is it the fact that she hurt him? Soon after arriving in Renoa, she learned of their names, Sylphiette Greyrat and Roxy M. Greyrat. Eris couldn't figure out what she was supposed to say if she actually met them. She learned about them from Rudius' letter, heard about them during her travels, and spent plenty of time thinking about them. But at the end of the day, she didn't know how to get the results that she wanted, and so she stood around like a statue at the gate. This plays into essentially those earlier segments of her being at the Sword Sanctum. And the idea that she admitting to herself, I'm not good at thinking. I'm not good about thinking about things like this, which is honestly, yes, a thing that many people deal with. We're not all geniuses. I'm not a genius. I'm not very smart. And I still make a lot of dumb mistakes. It is a sad reality that sometimes people just either they're not as smart as another person, or they don't feel they're smart as another person, but more so in the idea that with this situation, I don't think right. Eris thinks perfectly fine when it comes to fighting, combat, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to actually thinking about relationships, she's obviously having a problem. She's acknowledging that. And even here, she's acknowledging that. I'm going to meet them. I don't know how I'm going to respond to them. I'm not sure what to say. But to her credit, who knows what to say in that situation? You're about to go into a house to the person that you love, and they have multiple wives. What are you supposed to talk to them about? Who knows how to talk about that? It's a very difficult situation there. So don't be too hard on yourself, Eris. Thankfully, Aisha appeared and broke the stalemate. Aisha had noticed Eris the moment she arrived and wondered if it was Eris. Figuring it was, she set out preparing things. She wanted to show Eris perfect hospitality the moment she knocked at the door. After nearly an hour of waiting, however, she finally decided to take the initiative herself. While she didn't respect Eris as much as her brother, Aisha felt she owed a great debt to Eris personally. She played a major role in saving her from captivity in Sharon. Lilia had always taught her to repay her debts twofold. Upon hearing that Rudius might take Eris as his third wife, she silently decided to make it happen. Assuming Eris actually loved her brother, of course, thanks to Aisha, Eris finally entered the house herself. I love this. And technically an extension, Lilia herself. Aisha, wing girl. Aisha, the wing girl. She's stepping up. It's so funny because I think even with Roxy, it didn't seem like she was a fully 100% in accepting Roxy. But I think with Eris, it seemed like she's opening up, which again makes sense with her experience with Eris before. And that was kind of my whole thing that I was talking about previously with the idea of bringing Eris into the family. With each one of these girls, there's obviously the question of how it's going to affect each one of them. Sylphie, when Sylphie first was introduced to the family, technically before Norn got there, Norn had issue because she assumed Eris was Rias' girlfriend. And then Roxy came in the picture. There was difficulty with Norn again, the idea that, that's against her the teachings of the Mills Church. And then what does Aisha think of it? It seemed like Aisha was accepting it, but at the same time, there was a difficulty there that she was having. I assumed it was probably jealousy, the idea that Roxy beat her to becoming the next wife. But each one of them has their difficulties in who is going to accept them. Honestly, for me, yes, I see how Aisha would be acceptant. She saved my life. She helped save me and my mom. So it makes sense that she'd want to bring Eris into the picture. It seemed like they made a connection in Sharon, honestly. Problem is, Norn. Norn was a bit of a shock for me. When it came to Norn, yeah, it made sense again. From a novel reader's perspective, unfortunately, anime onlys don't see it. From the novel reader's perspective, yes, we've seen that she didn't seem like she was jiving very well with him. But to counter against that, she thought that Rudius was in love with her, and she was mad at Sylphie when it wasn't Eris that he married. So it's kind of odd. The idea that back here, it didn't seem like she was like 100% good with Eris. Honestly, it was more Eris was being mean at Norn because Norn was being mean to Rudius. But still, over here, once Sylphie was in the picture, Norn was mad because it wasn't Eris. So it's kind of odd to see here, Eris is back and she's kind of mad that she's there. But again, that goes to the whole teaching of the Mills. Thanks to Aisha, Eris finally entered the house itself. She was welcomed warmly by both Aisha and Lilia once inside. While Aisha ran off to the university to get Sylphie and Roxy, Lilia filled her in on the situation with more detail. Eris' introduction to Lucy came as something of a surprise to her. But while her smile was a little awkward, she found that her feelings weren't particularly negative. She could always have a baby of her own. Maybe hers might be a boy. She's already planning. She's like, oh, so this is his child. Well, okay. I mean, she's cute or whatever, but I'll probably give him a boy. But I can probably give him a boy. If I give him a boy, then it'll be special. I could see of the three, yeah, Eris probably being the one that'll finally give him a boy. I'm assuming that Roxy's child will probably be a girl. And then I think with Eris, it might actually be a boy. just to get that, the blood of the Grey Rats, the strength of the Grey Rat family all included into it. Given how uncertain she was at first, this was a surprisingly self-assured attitude. Aisha and Lilia did well in soothing her nerves with a friendly greeting. I like that idea, and the idea that when she's there, she's feeling anxiety, she doesn't know what to say, she's thinking about all these rumors, she's thinking about what is she supposed to say about these wives, not sure how if she's going to be able to accept it, walks in the door, is greeted, brought in, taken care of, soothing her down. The conversation remained calm and peaceful when Sylphie, Roxy, and Norn arrived. Roxy and Sylphie were a bit unsettled at Eris's shapely body, but they were far from hostile. It's going to come up in the anime. The moment this scene comes up in the anime, it's going to be the two characters staring at this up close the camera shot of her chest. It helped that Aisha and Lilia already set the tone with their own initiative. But more importantly, Sylphie and Roxy had already talked the issue through on their own. Unsurprisingly, Norn's expression suggests that she was less than overjoyed. But the matter was already settled already. So, she didn't openly oppose the situation. Knowing everyone had accepted Eris, she was trying to be considerate. Again, kind of bums me out that she wasn't like, look, I was trying to keep him for you. I didn't like the idea that he didn't stick with you. It also helped that it was obvious that within minutes, Eris was passionately in love with Rudius, as well as deeply respected him. It was a little embarrassing just listening to her. And everyone likes hearing someone they're fond of being complimented profusely. That's an interesting note there. The idea that they're all already noticing this girl is obsessed with Rudius. Like, she loves him. Like, I could just totally see her just constantly going, so where's Rudy? Where's Rudy? I'm surprised it took this long for her to ask where Rudius is at. But I guess, again, she's assuming that he'll get there eventually. Like, maybe he just stepped out for a minute. She doesn't know that he's already gone. The peaceful mood didn't last long, however. Eris finally asked where Rudius was, and when she learned that he had already left to fight Orsted, she snapped angrily at his wives. As far as she was concerned, it was their responsibility to accompany him to battle. Very, very interesting. And this goes without saying the obvious options here, but I find this really interesting because this is that abrupt realization about how differently she sees the relationship than anybody else. Now, granted, Sylphie, from her perspective, early childhood, it was, I was saved by him, he got taken away, I want to get stronger so that I can protect him like I wasn't able to back here. Now I want to be with him. He's finally here. I get to be with him. I don't want to lose him again. But still carrying that idea that one day I want to protect him. Roxy, obviously being his teacher, eventually realizing that he's very, very smart and very powerful and very skilled, seeking to get better, eventually being saved by him, falling in love with him, wanting to be with him, just wanting to be a part of his life. And now you have Eris. He taught me so many things. We traveled together. He kept me safe that whole journey. He nearly died. He's so powerful. He's so brave. He wants to get stronger the next time. I'm not as powerful as him. I'm holding him back. I need to get stronger. I want to fight Orsted with him. We will take him down together. I will sacrifice myself if he can at least take down Orsted. Her mentality is no matter where Rudius goes, her time with Rudius has always been they stay together. They fight together. They're always together. I gotta get strong so that I can always be together for the next threat. And now when she's presented with, where's Rudius? Oh, he's going to fight Orsted. Wait, you're not like me? You're supposed to be at his side. We're always supposed to be at his side. His wives are always, in my headcanon of what the relationship should be with Rudius, is always be at his side in combat. It doesn't make sense to her, the idea of Rudius leaving them behind and them trusting him. She sees things so differently than what they do. Now, granted, this is kind of changed at the later part of this chapter, obviously. I mean, we start to get a full perspective of everybody, which gets in my criticism. We get an idea from each one of them why they didn't, which is, yes, already kind of outlined before, but from Eris's perspective, from her mentality, this is wrong. You're supposed to be there. That's why she gets angry. That's why she gets infuriated. She doesn't have the whole picture, obviously, but in her headcanon, his wives, like me, should be at his side for fighting against Orsted. That's how I've always thought. I would be there. Why did you let him go alone? Are you trying to get him killed? We tried going with him, but he told us to stay behind. He said we just get in the way. Sylphie protested tearfully. Startled by this reaction, Eris paused for a moment, long enough to remember that she trained for years to fight alongside Rudius as equal. It occurred to her that these women had been there for him while she was absent. His letter said that they helped him many times over the years. She ended up feeling both a little jealous and a slight sense of superiority. She wouldn't be a burden. She could help him fight against Orsted. With these loud, confident words, she convinced Roxy, Sylphie, Ghislaine to accompany her to chase after Rudius. Such an interesting but such a cool little segment right here, because it's again that whole not knowing the whole situation here, making assumptions, acknowledging your assumptions are probably false, but at the same time it doesn't matter. Let's go. Like, there's that moment of like, what are you doing? Why wouldn't you not go? Let's go. We gotta go. You know what? No, we're not gonna talk about it. Go. I love it. Eris is in the chat. Eris is in the chat. At the same time, my mentality is I don't want them to go. They shouldn't be there. But at the same time, I do understand, yes, you kind of want to protect the one that you love. There's that struggle. And this has been pretty much most of the chapters here recently. That struggle of, do I trust them? Or do I just, without their consent, follow them? Because I don't want them to die. They don't want me to die, but I don't want them to die either. I'm same mind, Rudius. I don't want you to die either. If you die, that would crush me. What reason would I have to live? But I will admit, I don't know, based on how we've kind of laid out Eris so far and the idea of like her having trouble thinking things through, her brashness, her kind of jumping to conclusions, her jumping the gun, and struggling, again, with thinking things through. I don't know that she would cut that. I don't know that she would go, wait, these women were here for him when I was absent. I don't think she would. That doesn't fit, unless this is just really more of a struggle of being away from her for so long. And maybe this is just more social stuff that she has built by being around Isolde and Nina for so long. It's kind of hard to see her seeing something like that, or at least acknowledging something like that, especially in this moment. Right here, she should be furious. Like, where is he at? You let him go, you're going to die, and she just leaves. I can see that being Eris. What? You didn't go with him? I'm out of here. Where's he at? Tell me where he's at. I'm out of here. But no, I like that line. She ended up feeling both a little jealous and a slight sense of superiority. The jealous part is obvious the idea that they were here for him when I wasn't. And I'm kind of jealous that they helped him with these things that I couldn't. The slight sense of superiority, though, that seems like it could be like one of two things. One being the idea of, I would go help him. I will help him fight against Orsted, but she ends up calling them to go with her. Is a slight sense of superiority more in the idea that I was there first, and it was only because I wasn't there that you had to take and handle him? It is kind of a question mark there. I don't think it's that petty. The group hurried to the general area of the ambush, but ended up going a bit too far. Sylphie was the first to find the village and rushed in before a large, massive explosion went off. I'm joking. I did have a thought process that like, wait, so they were rushing over there? What if they got caught up in the explosion? Refugien did well in saying, yeah, they went way past them, and then the explosion happened behind them, and then they turned back around. But that does kind of tell you that Rudius was sitting there for probably a long time waiting for Orsted to arrive. Which, again, where was Orsted? Orsted could have been who knows where. And he probably had to travel through all the teleporters, and then finally he arrives there. So it probably took a good while before Orsted arrived there. So Rudius was preparing. He was waiting there. Eris and party were trying to find them, went past them. Orsted arrived. Rudius nuked the place. They turned around and came back. They were startled by an explosion behind them and rushed back to the sounds of combat. Eris sprinted through the woods, searched desperately, and strained her eyes to find Rudius. Finally, she spotted him on the verge of death and leapt in to defend him. Just like that, she was face to face with Orsted. Finally, after all that training, she finally in front of the target, one that she's always wanted to defeat, but two that she knows that she can't defeat. How terrifying is that? Eris fixed her eyes on Orsted and raised her weapon above her head. This was no ordinary sword. Its name was Phoenix Dragon Sword, one of the 7 sword god blades. Ghislaine, watch my back! Orsted, in contrast, assumed no stance whatsoever. He's like, huh, hi, how's it going? He simply stared at Eris with a suspicious expression on his face. No, it wasn't just her, but also the fallen Rudius and the two women tending to him. That was the interesting thing, because I assumed that when they seen the explosion and they started coming back, I would assume that Eris was super fast. I don't see, like, Roxy and Sylphie being able to keep up with her. So there's a possibility that maybe they didn't go very far out, and so where the combat happened in, face to face was closer to them. Otherwise, I don't see everybody making it there the same time that Eris did. I see Ghislaine. Ghislaine and Eris, I can see making it there really quick. But I don't see Sylphie and Roxy making it there very quickly. Especially since Roxy, again, is carrying something. But yeah, as per usual, he always keeping an eye on Rudius. He's always keeping at least one eye on Rudius. Eris in turn studied Orsted carefully, naked from the waist up, bleeding from hundreds of wounds, blood trickling down from his head, and looking generally lethargic. I can't wait for this. For those that don't, for the Mushoku Monday fans that don't watch any of my other content, let me fill you on a little secret. Kendra Suda is my man crush. I don't have man crushes. I just don't. But I make an exception for Kendra Suda. His voice makes me melt. And so I can't wait to see Orsted shirtless with Kendra Suda's voice coming out. I mean, I had that same thought process last Mushoku Monday, thinking about the idea of the aphrodisiac and the scented candles or whatever, and him getting all hot and bothered on Rudius. I'm thinking like Kendra Suda's voice. Anyways, back to Sirius. His hair was charred at the ends, and there was a large bruise on his shoulder. He was carrying a long, curved sword. Eris had never seen Orsted's blade, and while not an expert at weapons, she could tell it was very special. Her own sword was a treasure of the sword god style, but even its power couldn't compare to what was hidden in that thing. That's an interesting note. Again, these 7 sword god swords are apparently incredible. They were carved from a horn of this demon. So for her, somebody not experienced in weapons, I mean, they pointed out several times. I mean, back at Nanahoshi style meet, she didn't know what to think of all the swords at this crappy market that Reeves was saying. But even still, here she's like, that thing is way more powerful. The last time they faced Orsted, he defeated them barehanded. Reeves not only harmed the dragon god significantly, but forced him to draw his sword. That fact sent a thrill through Eris's entire body. This girl built different. Eris, she built different. She's like, oh my gosh, he did all that to this dude and made him draw his blade? Got him to phase 2? Shiver. I just have like a mental image of like the thirsty female character from an anime series where their mouth is all super wide and they got the drill going and they're huffing and puffing. She's like, oh my gosh, Rudy did that. Anyways, again, serious. She knew it was her turn to show what she could do, but she had to be patient and buy time. She suppressed her excitement. She couldn't defeat Orsted. Again, acknowledging it. It was something she realized instinctively and accepted easily the moment she jumped in to face him. As a child, the gap between them was like a tall tower that was hundreds of times taller than you. Looking at it, all you can tell is that it was taller than you. Eris believed that she could climb all the way up, but things were different now. She'd grown taller herself and could see Orsted's height for what it really was. Looking at him was almost dizzying. It wasn't a height that she could hope to climb. It is interesting how she sees Orsted versus Rudius. Now again, from Rudius' perspective, it's simply, he is too damn powerful. He is the strongest in the world. As he said countless times again in the idea of getting stronger, there is people in this world you could never be more powerful than. And yet, he had to try, because he felt he had no choice. Eris' perspective here, one look, I'll never beat that. And she came to that realization even before she got here, obviously, again. But her mindset was that at least I can support Rudius enough that he can get a killing blow in. She assumed Rudius could get strong enough that he could. But she would never. He would have to do it. And I'll give my life in that process if I have to. But she's acknowledging this like a tower that I'll never, ever climb. Similar but portrayed differently. I forgot about that. I forgot about this stupid line. Oh gosh, this little bomb. If I can get myself straight enough that I can say this.
Eris Boreas Greyrat, is Rudius so precious to you? What of Luke?
Oh gosh. What about Luke? Luke,
the man was destined to become your husband.
ain't no way in hell that boy tame her. Ain't no way in hell that boy tame her. I don't know. Maybe Luke freaky like that. I don't know. News to me, she said. That was so. Oh my gosh. When I read that, I'm like, why does Luke keep being brought up in random stupid places? This doesn't make any sense. But it sort of does. It sort of does. Now, granted, this is kind of that whole difficulty that I'm starting to get into with the whole timeline things. But yes, there could be a possibility there was a timeline that Luke may have been pushed that direction to get away from Rudius. It's sort of interesting here because this sort of does play into a possibility of Orsted's future being quite messed up. I mean, that was obvious the moment that they ran into them in Turning Point 2. And the idea that Orsted's seen, yeah, Rijerd, Eris, you guys aren't supposed to be here. Rudius? Who? Greyrat? No. Paul and Zenith, they're supposed to have a daughter. Who are you? It was already obvious back then that whatever future that Orsted sees is not right. But at this point, I'm kind of wondering, what future does Orsted see? It makes me believe that Orsted sees a future that Rudius fails here. That Rudius does not put the band together and have children that Orsted eventually would join to go kill the man god. Because he sees a future where Luke got with Eris and not with Rudius. And that might be a future where Rudius fails. That Luke, that maybe the man god somehow got Luke in there to take Eris. And thus Rudius would never have met Eris. But man, that would take some time to really sit through and think about. She dismissed his words easily enough. She didn't know who this Luke was. Yeah, don't need to know. Don't need to know. And again, I don't think that dude can tame her. But Rudius was the only one precious to her. She didn't want anyone else and never would. Confirmation, she's going to get through this. Like, there was a fear there that the idea of Rudius being with wives would be the thing that would cause her to go away. And now, granted, yes, again, in my own beliefs, I don't think that should be the case. But in the case of the story, for her relationship, for her desire, it makes sense. But she here is accepting, I don't care. I don't care that he has these wives. She wasn't sure what to say to them. I don't care about all this stuff. I just want to be with him.
I suppose it would be.
Orsted still hadn't assumed a stance. He was simply watching the others heal Rudius. To all appearances, he had completely let his guard down, but Eris knew that he was deliberately projecting that impression. He was leaving himself open, waiting for Eris to attack. Her mind flashed back to her final meeting with the Sword God. After bringing her to his room, Sword God Galfalion laid 3 swords in front of her and asked a simple question. What'll it be? Eris took each sword into her hand and examined them. Part of her wanted to say that the sword that she got from the Demon Continent was all she needed. But as she grew taller, it started to feel a bit too small for her. She honestly wanted something a bit longer. She also had a suspicion that its blade wasn't capable of harming Orsted. This next line, it just doesn't make any sense, so I'm going to read it word for word. The average sword saint might have objected that leaning on the power of your weapon betrayed a lack of pride in your own skills. I'm guessing that is another what the hell 7 Seas moment. It may have been the average sword saint might have objected that leaning on the power of your weapon portrayed a lack of pride in your own skills. That makes more sense because her response to that is, I don't give a shit. Her words, she knew pride wasn't worth in a fight to the death. Take your pride and go somewhere else. If you gotta throw some sand in somebody's eyes to live, do it. There's no rules in real combat, pretty much. So there you go. That's your possible what the hell 7 Seas moment. It just the sentence structure doesn't make any sense to me, and I'm dumb. This one, she chose the simplest of the three. Blade thin and only slightly curved. There was nothing ominous or intimidating about it. In fact, its clean, polished surface was very pleasant on the eye.
Ah, the Phoenix Dragon Sword it is.
It was originally a gift to the first sword god from the legendary craftsman known as the Dragon Emperor. Did they ever note that was a Dragon Emperor? I might be misremembering. I don't remember them ever mentioning that this Dragon Emperor. Maybe if they did, I didn't know the context of that back then, but now that starts to make sense to me. You get these Dragon Emperors all seem to be very, very so much so craftsmen, and they like crafting things. Very interesting. It was a sword made for the sword gods, designed to maximize the potential of their offensive style.
Nice choice, kid. This here is a magic sword. Doesn't look like it has any special abilities at a glance, but there's tiny channels of mana running all through the blade. They basically neutralize your opponent's battle aura. The Dragon God's aura is insanely strong, so the sword won't counteract it entirely, but it'll soften him up a bit.
In other words, it might be possible to pierce his defenses with it.
I never warmed up to that one myself, but I bet you'll use it well.
Very, very incredible sword. If that is the case, that seems massively OP. They've kind of already talked about this in the past, this idea that there's different battle auras. Like this specific case here, that there's a Dragon God aura. Not just battle aura, but Dragon God aura. But it is really interesting, the idea of something that could literally cut right through those battle auras. It's almost an indication of like, yeah, she could technically just pick it up and go after the sword god with it. But she doesn't care. Incidentally, the reason that he'd only shown her 3 of the 7 sword god blades was that 4 were in use. He carried one, as did the 2 sword emperors, and Sword King Ghislaine. The other 2 would no doubt end up in the hands of the style's 2 promising young sword saints. Nina's still gonna get in the picture. Nina's still gonna get one. And yes, her boyfriend. Once they progress a bit further in their training.
Now then, let's get down to business. First rule of fighting Orsted. First rule of Fight Club.
He paused, staring her in the eyes.
Never make the first move.
Eris didn't ask why. She knew the answer all too well herself.
The man's water god style is divine level. He'll kill you in a single counterstroke.
A bitter memory flashed in her mind of being sent flying with a single strike.
Make him come to you. That's step 1.
Practitioner of the sword god style always sought to land the first strike. To defeat them, you just had to wait and counter. According to sword god, this simple strategy was the essence of Orsted's peerless technique. Makes perfect sense. Even the last time they fought him, he was waiting for them. He was, well, yes, granted, he did go in to kill Rudius immediately, but when it came to somebody strong like Rajerd, and yeah, even Eris in a sense, he was letting them come to him. He was playing as Water God style. He was shifted into that mode. And it seemed like that is his default. Like, it makes sense. Always go that as the default. So Eris didn't move. She wouldn't risk striking first against a master of the Water God style. With Sword God style inherently aggressive and Water God style defensive, she was at a disadvantage. The Water God style's counterattacks did not fail. Interesting. Did not fail. Unless a student of the Sword God style was superior to a certain degree. That makes sense. That was what was going on with Isolde. It made sense that she wasn't able to overcome her. The Water God style, in the end, would be victorious. Eris learned this while training with the Water King Isolde, and therefore, she wasn't going to make a mistake and attack first. While not easy for the notoriously aggressive Mad Dog to stand around, she was going to have to anyways. Again, very interesting that she's come to that understanding. In a case of a sword god versus a water god, the counterattacks will always be victorious, unless their skill level is higher to a certain degree. Now she's putting this in the perspective of her situation here. Back here, me versus Isolde. She was countering me every time. Here, me versus Orsted. Yeah, I don't think I'm above him, so I'm not going to do that.
Why are you not coming?
Orsted narrowed his eyes in puzzlement. All I need to do is wait, and when Rudius recovers, we can attack you together.
Well, this is a surprise. Eris Boy's Grey Rat speaks of fighting alongside allies. Another change, it seems. I did think it was possible that she'd turn out differently. If she learned to cool her head and train under the right master. Perhaps I was right.
It's not Boreas anymore. I'm just Eris Grey Rat.
A different woman than Eris I know then.
Moving slowly and deliberately, Orsted finally assumed a stance of sorts. His left hand still dangling loosely at his side. He raised his right arm and pointed the tip of his blade at Eris.
Very well, I'll come to you then.
Nothing had happened yet, but the battle just entered the second stage. This is phase 3, technically. We already... the drawing of the sword was stage 2. Again, Eris thought back on our conversation with the sword god.
Orsted can use the Sword of Light with his bare hands for a blade. But after all your practice with Nina, I think you should know how to deal with that. Just cut through his wrist before it reaches maximum velocity. That said, there's no telling if he'll use his right hand or his left. If he raises both, you're gonna have to guess. He might swing from above or below, too. Pick left or right, high or low. That's step 2.
Eris couldn't help but grimace slightly. Orsted had already drawn his sword. He'd be using a true Sword of Light, not an approximation of it with his hand. The question was if she can counter it. The answer was yes. He wasn't invincible. He was breathing somewhat roughly and was covered in wounds. Also, he was only holding with his right arm, and his sword was low. Just as she hoped, despite his injuries, he was still holding his weapon in a single hand. He really thinks she's nothing to worry about. Normally, that would throw her in a rage, but she processed it calmly. She's so grown up. It felt strange to her, considering all those angry years she spent demanding the world's respect and fear. But today, she was pleased to be underestimated. Yeah. It's like one of those moments where you don't speak up. Like there's so many stories where the character gets mad and they're like, why don't you take me serious? Okay, fine, I'll take you seriously, and they get beat up. It's like, don't. Just allow that. Again, in a fight to the death, put the rules away. Put pride away.
Sword god style, Sword of Light.
Orsted's hand flicked the air with a fearsome speed, but simultaneously, sword god style, reflection blade. Eris swung her own sword down as well. She'd practiced it 1,000 upon 1,000 times. It was the best way to counter Sword of Light. With your sword at a maximum velocity, you targeted the slower moving wrists of your opponent and cut through it before it completed its swing. Orsted's sword spun in the air, along with his right hand. Damn, girl. Damn, girl. Eris is over here, like, shooting thousands of stone cannons, dropping nukes on him, explosions, a rock freezing, all this stuff, poisons, aphrodisiacs. Eris throwing all this stuff into the pot, and then Orsted comes out of it going, oh, I got a bruise, and I got some cuts. I got a little bit of blood right here. And it's like, by hand. Eris, one strike, by hand. Damn, girl. Again, it kind of shows that extremely interesting difference between physical combat swordsmanship versus magic. That ongoing debate, and even the thing that they brought up multiple times in the University of Magic, the idea that swordsmanship itself is so powerful, but we're like trying to catch up with it or whatever. And Eris is technically doing that by doing extremely creative things with the magic itself, creating new spells that seem to have been... that maybe have been in the past, but maybe have been lost through time. But right here kind of shows that difference. Eris did all that. And nuke on top of Orsted. And here, Eris cuts right through it. Say it because of her skill, say it because of the sword itself, but it's still kind of staggering to see that difference. I got him. For a moment, Eris believed it was over. But before she could follow up, Orsted reached upward, caught his severed hand, pressed it on his wrist, and instantly reattached it. At the same moment, he used the upward movement to fire off a spinning kick. She dodged it with a half step backwards, only because the sword god warned her that he might try something like that. Orsted followed up with a slicing bare hand strike, but Eris struck it down with her sword. Her strike didn't even scratch his skin. Orsted's sword thumped in the ground behind him, and his injuries appeared to have been healed. In the blink of an eye, he restored himself completely with some incredibly powerful healing spell. Break bar again. He just like, all good now. Everything was a waste. Like it's all like poof. Oh, that's gotta hurt. That's gotta hurt. What a monster, Eris thought calmly to herself. I don't know how she stayed calm. I'd be like, well, damn. Reset. What next? Let's try. It's that moment where you kind of realize, holy crap, who is Orsted? Like, what is this guy? Again, it solidifies even more so Eris even bothering with trying this. Like, almost that feeling of like the man god telling him kill Orsted, and you're like, it's impossible. Like, it literally feels impossible. Her last attack wasn't a Sword of Light, but its speed and power were considerable. Yet, it bounced right off of him. Sword of Light was the only means of cutting through his holy dragon aura, even with the Phoenix Dragon Sword.
I see the sword god's cunning in your tactics. You must have been a highly favored student, Eris Grey Rat.
Eris returned her sword to its position over her head, mind clear, her emotions steady. But Orsted unleashed a different kind of attack.
Did Galfalion tell you stories of his exploits as you lay in his bed?
What? Orsted gone petty. Damn! This is like the last thing I could see coming out of Orsted's mouth. He just went petty. I do have to, okay, this is a story moment time. Back earlier, when Eris recalled choosing her sword, I made a joke in the Discord to the mods that when he laid out the swords, he laid out 4 swords. And Eris said, "That's not a sword." And he goes, "Oh yeah, sorry about that." I made mentally a stupid joke like that. And then I go down here and I read that. And I'm like, holy crap, me and Orsted are getting way too close. It was absolute proof that I am completely sold on Orsted, and that Orsted has become part of my own like best of favorite characters, is because I literally made the same joke. Like Orsted infested my mind that like Eris is thinking about this whole moment that she goes in there to choose a sword, and I'm Orsted going, yeah, that was probably another sword there, wasn't it? There was another sword there, wasn't it? Oh gosh. Anyway, sorry. After everything, Eris respected the sword god deeply. Over the last few years, Galfalion had thrown himself into the task of training her and entrusting her with his dreams. He was simply her master, and she was simply his student. He had trained her because their goals aligned. Ordinarily, Eris would have been infuriated at Orsted's accusation, especially with 3 other women and Ruius here, but her master gave her a clear warning.
If things start going well, Orsted might try to needle you. Don't go and fall for it, you hear me?
The sword god had anticipated this, so it had no effect on Eris whatsoever. She had no reason to be angry. Orsted was just proving that Galfalion had his number. This proved that, yeah, looks like he knew you way too well.
I see you've truly grown stronger.
She brushed off the taunt with a snort. Orsted murmured these words in an almost melancholy tone and slowly raised both hands. At the sight of this, Eris called the last piece of advice the sword god gave her.
For whatever reason, the man can't go all out. He's a master with magic and the sword, but he'll try to sell things with his aura and his martial arts, especially when he's fighting someone with a style he's real familiar with. He starts off with kicks and punches, then goes into magic if he really has to, but when he's up against something new, for some reason, he tends to sit back and study techniques he's seeing for the first time. That just might be the chink in his armor.
Orsted wasn't going in for the kill. He seemed to be slowly toying with her, like a cat batting cruelly at an exhausted mouse. Eris ground her teeth audibly, took her left hand from the Phoenix Dragon sword, and reached for the unmarked blade she received at the Midgard village. Her right hand held the Phoenix Dragon sword above her head, but her left hand was now gripping the nameless sword, still sheathed behind her waist. It was a strange stance, all the more because the sword god style had no concept of dual wielding. But she didn't just train that. Using 2 swords was once a technique of the North god style. More importantly, while the Phoenix Dragon sword was a deadly magic weapon, she wasn't capable of using Sword of Light with a single hand. There were techniques that involved drawing a sword directly into a strike, but her grip on the unmarked sword made the best of them impossible, meaning her stance was irrational. It made no sense at all. It wasn't the sort of blunder a sword king and a master of the sword god style would make. For that reason, Orsted stopped moving and studied Eris carefully. I've always got a massive kick how Orsted just gets so swept up in things that he doesn't know. That was kind of the whole thing that I didn't really notice it when I watched the first season of the anime adaptation, but I did notice it when I started reading the novel series for Turning Point 2. Orsted couldn't keep his eyes off of Ruius. Now, my theory at the time, I think, was more in the idea of maybe it's because Ruius is the anomaly. He shouldn't be here. He's a threat. But as I thought about it, it made more sense, the idea that Ruius was doing things that he'd never seen before, and he was curious about it. So it kind of turned this thing where, yes, it could be this idea of maybe he just inherently knows everything. If somebody discovers it over here, boop, they now know it. I think it's more of an idea that they've gone around and studied it all. They've been around for a long time. And every time they see something, they inherently, instinctively want to see more of it, which technically does play into all these Dragonkin. They love knowledge. They love art. They love building things. It's almost as if each one of them has a sort of trait that they gravitate towards. Like the one that crafts, monuments and stuff like that and statues. That's all they do. It's all they want to do. And yes, the one that made the swords. It's all they want to do. Is craft the most powerful sword. Orsted might be the case of wanting to just consume all skills, every ability. That's just something that's inherently in them. I have to consume this. So it's almost instinctual that the moment that Orsted sees a new technique, what is this? I want to see it. Do it. It's so weird. It's so weird and so cool. Because yes, Gal's seen that. Gal apparently noticed that. He likes new things. Show him something weird, and he'll stop. For that reason, Orsted stopped moving and studied Eris carefully. His eyes were entirely focused on her and only her. Not even Rudius being held behind her. She had his complete attention for the moment. But she had to take action or Orsted would step forward to attack. Fortunately, Eris had improvised a certain move for this very moment. It was based on something she picked up from the North Emperor Auber. The Peacock Blade. The Peacock Blade came back into the picture. Though she had only seen it once, she trained herself to execute this move with a single hand. At extreme velocity, in the very same instant, she drew her sword. It was imperfect, but highly lethal. She created something new. That's all it takes. When their backs were against the wall, students of the North God style threw their sword. Eris's left hand moved roughly, but with confidence. Her fingers caught the sword's hilt, pulling it free. In the same motion, as her arm whipped forward, she hurled it at Orsted. The unmarked sword that accompanied her throughout so much cut cleanly through the air, aimed straight at her foe. The momentum carried Eris's left hand upward to her other sword. Without a moment's hesitation, she swung down with both hands, executing a flawless sword of light. Her fearsome attack flew right past the airborne sword, slicing towards the top of Orsted's head. There was a sharp clang. Holding her sword in her follow-through position, Eris clicked her tongue in irritation. Orsted had caught its blade between his hands. The unnamed blade had just struck his body solidly, only to deflect off his aura and fly back behind her.
You've exceeded my expectations, but I suppose it's over now.
Nope. Blade still frozen in Orsted's hand. Eris turned to her unmarked sword behind her. Rudius was standing there. The others had finished healing him. We're just getting started. It took Eris an instant to process what her eyes were seeing. Rudius was standing, dark circles under his eyes. His light brown hair had gone white. His legs were trembling weakly, his face deathly pale, and his lips purple. Roxy and Sylphie were supporting him on his sides. So this would be another case of literally somebody spending so much mana that they lose their hair color. I am curious if Reese will ever get it back. Sylphie never did. But yes, when Sylphie was falling, they assumed that she used so much mana to try to stop herself from dying that she turned her green hair white. Now, I have some other theories around that whole thing, but again, it kind of emphasizes this idea that there's a possibility in this world, by using too much mana, you could essentially deplete the color from your hair, apparently. Your color of your hair is mana, and you're depleting it. Still kind of interesting to show that, yes, his light brown hair had gone white. Now, you could say that that's an aspect of, like, just showing how deathly he got, that he lost so much blood, and it's kind of another way of describing how he's just lost everything in himself, like lost the life within himself. But still, yeah, it's kind of indicating the idea that he used so much mana, he lost the color of his hair, which I guess, again, kind of emphasizes how much he pushed himself. But I'll be curious to see, does he ever get his hair color back? It's kind of a good question. Maybe once he gets his mana back, the mana recolored his hair to a different color. Or, yeah, and it also kind of additionally adds that element of question mark of, why does that affect his hair color? Was his hair color supposed to be white, but after he was created in this world, that some sort of disguise makes it brown so that he matches his family? I know I'm looking way too much in that. You never know with Refugin.
Getting started? With what exactly?
Reese was in no condition to fight. His mana was exhausted, strength gone, and willpower failed him. He was battered and bruised, both physically and emotionally. You'll see soon enough. The sight of him was enough to still Eris's resolve. She took 3 deep breaths. Air flooded into her lungs as she gripped her sword more tightly. Clenching the back of her teeth tightly for an instant, she licked her lips. Then she tensed her stomach muscles and roared as loudly as she could. "You 3, get Reese out of here right now!" Her voice roared through the air. "I'll hold Orsted here, even if it kills me." I like that aspect, though. She's obviously crap, all right, what next? And then she looks back. She wasn't giving up. She's like, no, it's not over yet. She looks back to get her sword. Like, she's still going. But the moment she's seen Rudius, it was like this moment of like, oh, that's my boy. Like she looked like, oh yeah, let's do this. But she's choosing to get him out of there. He's good. He's still alive. He's still standing. But he's not going to give up. I got to get him out of here. Get him out of here. He's not going to stop. Get him out of here. I'll hold it. Eris is in the chat, please. Eris is in the chat. This girl legit gonna die for him. This girl legit will die for Rudius. It has been proven right here. Now, granted, everybody else does it too. They're all following her too. The only one was not Roxy, but she was pregnant. Wait, I'll fight too. Sylphie's legs were trembling, but she shouted those words nonetheless. Orsted was terrifying beyond measure. While it was her first time seeing Orsted, she knew standing against him was death. Still, the choice wasn't difficult. Not with Rudius' life on the line. If anything, she was full of regret that she even let him go alone to begin with, to fight a monster like this. She didn't know. She didn't know. I mean, she could know of stories of the Dragon God, and he did say that it was Orsted, the Dragon God, but seeing is different than hearing. The words, "Are you trying to get him killed?" still rang in her ears. It was never her intention. She's seen Rudius regain his usual energy and focus, despite his fears. She assumed Rudius, an incredibly powerful mage, would make it back to her in the end. Also, the magic armor seemed overwhelming. She convinced herself that nothing could defeat that thing. It was only her confidence in Rudius that held her back. Eris stared silently into Sylphie's eyes before nodding. All right, you take the back line. Ghislaine, get Rudius and Roxy out of here. Eris, my job is to protect you. I'm getting too far ahead. Sylphie's situation, yes, like I said earlier, I understand why she did what she did. It's just like, I think Roxy's going to be significantly different reason, but similar reason as Sylphie. And this idea of just assuming Rudius is extremely powerful. And if he puts his mind to something, he's going to accomplish it. And plus, he kept telling them, you're not coming with me. I'm going to do this alone. I'll handle it. Now, yes, you can argue the moment he told both of them, I'm probably going to die. There's a good chance I'm going to die. Here's the contingencies if I die. The moment he said that, that's probably a sign that they should have gotten involved. But yes, technically from Roxy's perspective, as she'll say in a minute, or at least put it into this current moment, there's the fact that she's now carrying the child of Rudius. She has to protect that child. That child is important to not only her, but Rudius. I have to keep it safe. But similar to Sylphie, they're both dealing with the same situation of, he said he'd handle it. He said, do not get involved. We trusted his choice here. But I do kind of see, yes, from Sylphie's perspective here, especially after Eris has literally told her, let's go. Eris had to tell her, no, we're going now. Because Eris knows what Rudius is fighting. Sylphie doesn't. She's never experienced him before. If Sylphie was there at Turning Point 2, that's probably extremely different. She would have seen how terribly powerful this person is. Again, seeing and experiencing is different than hearing. But yeah, I can see her having this massive regret because, yeah, now that I see this thing, I can't believe I let him go alone. I let him go to fight this monster, despite the fact that he seemed like he was confident. The confident Rudius has hit me once again with his confidence. And he has this great armor that Sylphie sparred with him with the armor. Couldn't touch it. How could anybody touch this thing? Still, I can't believe I let him go alone. I shouldn't have done that. And again, it goes completely counter to her mindset in the previous chapter, and the idea that she wants to be there for him to protect him. She wants to be that knight in shining armor that comes in and swoops in and protects him. I'm curious why Eris would choose to have Sylphie guard her back versus Ghislaine. That's another moment where, again, I think it's because we've been away from her for so long. Just like the situation earlier where she came to the conclusion that, oh yeah, that's right, these girls were with him. I don't think she would come, I don't imagine her thinking through that process. Here's same thing. If I'm facing somebody pretty much certain death, why would she accept the help of Sylphie over Ghislaine? Now, yes, she was looking into Roxy and Sylphie. She was learning about them on her journey. She might have learned that Sylphie possibly was Silent Fitz. Maybe that word had gotten out enough that she could hear that. And find out that, yes, this girl's been protecting the princess of a kingdom. But still, over Ghislaine? I don't see that. If she wants herself protected. But simply, yes, the obvious answer here probably is she looked at Sylphie and seen that Sylphie was determined. I see myself in her right now. She wants to make sure that Rudeus gets out. I can see her. I can see right into her soul that she wants to protect Rudeus too. Okay, stand beside me. Let's do this. Let's die together. But yeah, it was the Beastfolk Sword King's turn to protest. Ghislaine had watched Eris fight her way through life, watched her train with a single-minded focus. And for some reason, she stood back and watched this battle unfold without interfering. I am very curious about that she was there the whole time. I thought at first, when the fight first started, I thought that she was bluffing. But I don't know that why would you bluff saying a random name to somebody that's not going to know who that is? They might think that they're talking about one of the two girls behind her. But yeah, she never interfered. Ghislaine seen it as her way to repay Eris's deceased grandfather, Saros, to whom she owed so much. Like letting his granddaughter have this fight that she's been looking forward to this whole time. Sort of makes sense, sort of doesn't. What? Are you not going to listen to me? I'm telling you to protect the people I care about. I won't do it. I could never face Lord Soros or Philip if I let you die here. But now, the girl was planning to take a path of certain death. And Ghislaine couldn't allow that. Her refusal was reflective rather than reasoned. She wasn't very good at thinking and avoided it if possible. Stop it, we all need to run. Given her pregnancy, Roxy knew that she wasn't going to be much use in combat. She came there knowing that she'd only be a burden if it came to that. Her plan was to drag Rudeus to a horse and flee as quickly as possible. There was a chance that such strenuous movement might cause a miscarriage, but helping Rudeus escape was her first priority. While she hadn't given any thought to what would happen after that, she believed that they simply had to run and regroup in safety. That is a struggle. That is an absolute scary thought, is the idea of, I have this here, and this is extremely important, and important to him, but he's right here right now, and I have to get this out of here. So you have this fear that saving his life would have harm to your own child is... Ugh. Eris and Ghislaine argued. Sylphie and Roxy braced themselves to act. And as he took this in at the corner of his eye, Orsted let out a long, loud sigh. Everyone except Rudeus went on guard. 4 sets of eyes glared fiercely at Orsted. Indifferent to their gaze, the dragon god raised his voice to a bellow.
Rudeus Greyrat!
Rudeus flinched, visibly, at the sound of his name.
So long as you serve the man god, I will not allow you to escape, even if it means killing everyone here and the others waiting for you in the city. I will hunt you down and take your life.
Rudeus was trembling now, more obviously than before, his knees shaking uncontrollably as he stared down at the ground in front of him.
While I place no trust in the man god's words, given what he told you, I will also abduct your children once you're dead.
Rudeus' trembling stopped. Fire flickered in his eyes, and he punched his quaking leg. He reached for his staff from Roxy, forgetting that he lost his hand not too long ago. It threw him off balance before Roxy caught him. Even as he leaned on her, he glared fiercely at Orsted with murder in his eyes. Really pushing how heavily Rudeus right now loves his family. Absolutely loves his family. This dude. So this is one of those moments like when it was happened to me in the previous chapters again. I think people kind of always get this misconception that when I criticize Rudeus, I don't understand the full picture. And it's more the fact that I just don't want to qualify every time I say something. I don't need to qualify every time I say something. There's just some people, for some reason, they don't get it unless you qualify every single time. But I think actions speak a lot. Actions sometimes will kind of give you those perspectives every now and then of how much Rudeus has changed. Again, this being the Rudeus that locked himself up in a room, hated his family. The family tried to help him. He kept pushing them away. Now you have somebody that's literally stepping forward, knowing full well he has nothing left in him. He's got no arm. He's beat they'll get. He's got his eyes are sunken in. He's dying. And he knows the threat in front of him has literally regenerated himself. He's back to 100%. Sort of. I mean, he's still got he seemingly lost a lot of blood and whatnot. But he's pretty much back to 100%. We're back to square one. But Rudeus is still going to walk out there. Going to, if he has to, chew on his foot. That's what he was doing earlier. Literally, he was chewing on his foot. If this will stop you, I'm going to chew on you. He doesn't want his family dead. And it's almost, again, going back to that whole idea of how petty Orsted can get. Just like with Eris, talking about how, did you learn these things when you're in bed with him? It's almost like right now he's provoking Rudeus. And I think he's purposely provoking Rudeus before giving him an out. I'm going to kill your family. I'm going to abduct your children. Or, that's what he's doing. He's setting it up. Get him mad. Get him fearful. And then give him the option out.
However, your imitation of the fighting god armor, the bountiful mana bestowed upon you by the Laplace aspect, and your immunity to my curse may yet prove useful.
Rudius's rage faltered slightly as he looked on with a dubious, wary expression.
Betray the man god. Join me instead.
You've got to be kidding. Rudius, don't listen to him. Sylphie and Eris were convinced that he was lying, even if they had no reason to know this. Ghislaine and Roxy held their silence, but they knew Orsted was up to something, that some trap may be hidden in his words. I actually like that. Take note. The two young teenagers, they're just convinced he's lying. They have no reason to know this. They're convinced that he's lying. The two adults stayed silent. They were suspicious, knowing there's probably a trap in there, but they don't immediately speak out their judgment. It was something when I read that, I'm like, that's kind of interesting to note that, how specifically Refugin laid out Eris and Sylphie, the young teenagers, barking out something, whereas Roxy and Ghislaine kept quiet.
Should you accept my offer, I will overlook this unprovoked ambush and restore your arm to its original condition.
Rudius seen his words differently. He noticed something about the tone of Orsted's voice. He had realized the man's throat was trembling slightly, and that fact was nagging at him. I'm absolutely convinced right here, Orsted sees himself in Rudius. I don't see any reason why Orsted's voice would be trembling slightly. Orsted's not afraid of Rudius. Now, yes, I think there's a side of Orsted that is cautious of Rudius. You're an anomaly. I have to take you seriously because you're an anomaly. But I think why Orsted's throat is trembling, why Orsted is even giving this option, is because he sees obviously right here, I can use him. This guy is strong. But this man is me. This man went through what I went through. This man was used, deceived, and pushed to his limits because of the man god. Just like me, or by someone Orsted knew. Again, going back, my current theory on Orsted is that at some point, the man god deceived Orsted, tricked him into something. Again, going back to the history of the worlds, it could be the fact of destroying the other worlds. Something like that. Or the man god destroyed the other worlds and Orsted was trying to stop them. But I think at some point, Orsted was deceived by the man god, and now wants to kill the man god. And I think one of the telling signs was the fact that when Rudius first met Oldius, he said, "Are you the man?" He turned and said, "Man god," and he said that Oldius had the same face on him, that expression that Orsted did. Both of them were deceived horrifically by the man god. So it continues my theory in the idea that Orsted was deceived by the man god and now wants to kill the man god. But I think there is this element that over time, there's a chance that Orsted lost empathy. Through those travels of trying to hunt down a way to find the man god, Orsted lost empathy, lost any sort of restraint in himself to not kill others. Simply this teenager saying, man god, yeah, he appears in my dreams, I'm gonna kill him. They lost somewhere. They, similar to Rudius's older self, lost that barrier to not cross. It's another one of the people that's working for the guy who ruined everything. The man god sent them to kill me. The man god sent them to break something. The man god sent them to cause havoc. The man god's gonna do something with this boy. I gotta get rid of them. And so again, this whole time, Orsted's like, you left that note there, you said you're working for the man god, I tracked him down, I beat the crap out of him, he's chomping at my foot saying, please save my children, don't kill the man god, and I said, no, I'm not going to not kill the man god, I'm still gonna kill him. Even to his dying breath, this boy is telling me to leave the man god alone? Heck no. And now right here, after seeing all these people come in and support Rudius, and Rudius is still walking towards him with nothing left, he's going, it's me. That boy is me. He went through the same thing I did. He was deceived by the man god. Curious. Because again, I don't see any other reason why his throat will be trembling. Orsted can just leave right now. Pretty much everybody in front of him wants to flee. He could let him go. But instead, he wants to recruit him. Be my ally, not his. We'll get him. And again, I don't think it's because Orsted knows that eventually he's going to join with Rudius's descendants. Because again, in the future that he sees, Eris is with Luke. And there ain't gonna be no spawn from Luke that's gonna be powerful enough to beat the man god. And additionally, yes, he sees that Rudius doesn't fear him. And that could be useful. But yes, it could still be somebody that Orsted knows. Maybe he sees a past friend or ally in Rudius.
I am the dragon god. Once you are under my protection, the man god will not find it so easy to meddle with you.
I wonder what that is. Is it simply me being at your side, me watching over you, or some sort of actual spell or protection that can give to him? It could be something that he gave Nanahoshi for her to survive their travels. He may have been putting on some kind of protection on him. Or he could just have more crazy rings and stuff to give to him.
Here, give these out to all your family members. It will protect them from spells.
Doubt and temptation mingled in Rudius' eyes. He's like, wait, yeah, no, yeah, should I? No, yeah, I kind of want to.
Rest assured, he cannot hear what we speak of at this very moment.
I'm curious about that. Is it because the dragon god is right there that it's causing sort of this fog in what the man god can actually see? Or is he just kind of like going, okay, let me turn on this spell that prevents somebody in looking from being able to see it?
If your allegiance with a man god is unwilling, I would think it's a most enticing offer. Choose now, Rudius Greyrat. Will you side with the man god and lose everything at my hands? Or will you join me and fight against him? You aren't affected by my curse. This is a choice you are capable of making.
I like that idea. It's this idea of, like, essentially, because my curse is not affecting you, you're in the right mind to be able to decide. If it was anybody else, they'd probably choose to either... If it's, basically the curse, he probably wouldn't want to choose it. Rudius' gaze met Orsted's. He then exhaled slowly, studied the dragon god's face, as if searching for an answer in it. He was trying to see what was hidden behind that stony expression. But his eyes couldn't tell him anything. Silence stretched for several seconds. Rudy? Finally, Rudius staggered out of Roxy's arms, slowly walking forward. Every step he risked falling on his face. He lurched to the side and caught himself on Ghislaine's shoulder. When he lost his balance, he grabbed a hold of Sylphie, who caught him. Eventually, he made it past Eris, then fell to Orsted's feet. He made no move to raise after that. Instead, looked up at the man before him. Is there really a way to protect my family from the man god?
There is. He possesses great knowledge of the future, but he is not all-seeing, much less all-powerful.
Is it absolutely reliable?
Not absolutely, no. I would not pretend to know the full breadth of his powers.
Orsted made no definite promise. He didn't even offer soothing words of reassurance. Note that. Nonetheless, Rudius looked up at him as a man seeking salvation. There was tears in the corners of his eyes, although it was hard to say what inspired them. But he made his decision. I'll serve you. Help me. Please. And so, on this day, Rudius Greyrat entered the service of the dragon god. Orsted's in the chat. Orsted's in the chat. I just love the fact that within probably a volume, I'm going to find out how evil Orsted is. It's going to be so great. 2 chapters later, Orsted kills Roxy, impales Aisha, and laughs at Rudius' face. It's going to be so sweet. Just that everybody's going to laugh at me is really what it is. Not that Aisha and Roxy dying would be sweet. Anyways, yeah. Super good. Super cool. I absolutely love this ending. Like I said, I said at the very beginning, I spoiled everybody. I loved this conclusion. I wasn't happy with Rudius going to fight Orsted. The moment I seen Man God on that letter, I was like, crap, Rudius is going there to actually fight Orsted. He is going to try to kill him. I didn't even consider the idea of essentially reverse plot armor. Like the idea that Rudius, again, is not the hero. He is going to go there and going to fail miserably. But I honestly wasn't really sure if Orsted would want to stop and what was going to stop him. And that kind of goes in that realm of seemingly Orsted eventually realizing that, in my theory, Rudius is somebody he knows or himself in a way. And thus wants to use him and let him join him rather than kill him. Because right now, he's proven to be a threat. And Orsted's choice at this moment makes sense. Join me or die. Because if you join me, that's fine. We'll work together. We'll take out the Man God. If you don't join me, I have to kill you because the Man God's pushing you to try to kill me. And you're going to come after me again. There's no doubt about it. Man God will have you come at me again. And thus, I'm going to get rid of you now. But it all played out very well. I think that whole aspect really does make sense to me. Now, here goes. My criticism. I do have something of this, mainly this 9th chapter, that I didn't so much like. Felt very old school JRPG. The later parts of this felt very old school JRPG to an extent that I felt it was a little cheesy. I like understanding why each character came there, but I felt like those things probably should be kept to another chapter. I would have loved to have a conversation or something that comes up later to explain what everybody was thinking right here. Instead, Refugien almost felt the necessity to go to each character and say why they're there, what they're facing right now, and ultimately it's everybody getting their moment to stand up there and be brave. It is the last boss scenario of a JRPG where the main character is here and everybody steps forward and says, I will fight too, and blah, 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 blah. And the next person steps forward, I will fight too, blah, 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 blah. Like they give this long tirade, they give this long, like 5-paragraph statement while the boss is standing there going, all right, yeah, everybody done? Okay, let's go. It was a little, it just felt off. Again, not to say what each individual is thinking is not important, just it felt weird having it here. Still, Rudia stepping forward and everything was super fantastic, but super good, super good. And again, I think at this point, if there's any doubt that Rudius really does love his family, it's out the window. And yes, I fully acknowledge that the last 3 chapters has basically been that in his preparations to do this because it's all to save his family. But actions speak volumes. Actions speak massive volumes. But no, this later part of here I think is very telling. Orsted made no definite promise. He didn't even offer soothing words of reassurance. I think that's important. The alternative is the other side of this battlefield. The man god. What does the man god keep doing? He keeps making promises. He keeps saying soothing things. He is whispering in Rudius' ear all the time. Yes, deceiving constantly. Yes, cracking jokes. But he also does a lot of reassurance. He says a lot of things that tries to get Rudius to believe him, or at least understand him. Orsted is saying, I'm not going to promise that. I'm not going to say that. I can't say that. He's not. I think there's a lot of trust in somebody that is willing to say, I don't fully understand this, and I'm not going to promise this is going to work out here. Because it's easier to understand the person themselves is not trying to deceive you by trying to tickle your ears. And I think that kind of stands out to Rudius right there because of that reason. Because he's been dealing with the man god for so long. Additionally, earlier when Orsted was first talking about bringing Rudius under his wing, he says, your imitation fighting god armor. Again, that's kind of the thing that leads me to believe that man god is not the fighting god. But the fighting god could have been working for the man god. Then he says, the bountiful mana bestowed upon you by the Laplace aspect. I don't think we've ever had them kind of quantify him having that mana pool as having an aspect, like a sort of mark or something like that. Now, granted, aspect is a very loose term, but in most cases, kind of with something like this, applies the idea of a sort of mark. You've achieved the Laplace aspect, and it's within you. Putting aside how it's worded and what that necessarily means, it does kind of imply this idea of him literally getting that from Laplace, that you have some sort of attribute that Laplace had. Again, it might be the idea of getting it from Laplace themselves, or whatever. They deem this sort of overabundance as sort of a trait that people like Laplace had, and you're similar in that way. So I'll be curious to see in the future if, with how the Dragon God's sort of quantifying that as being something tied into Laplace, how that will come up in the future. But yeah, really fantastic ending. Like I said, technically because I didn't want Orsted to die. I didn't want Orsted to die. I was rooting for Orsted like an idiot, but kind of glad to see how it kind of turned out in the end. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to play out going forward. Again, what does the Dragon God provide Rudius that will give him some sort of clear peace of mind? Because as it stands now, they're going to go back, and Rudius is going to be constantly going, so the man god's going to know, when is he going to come after me? When is he going to try to kill me? What's going to happen? And it might just be turning the idea that Dragon God knows some way of either putting a blessing upon them, some sort of protection upon them. Again, equipment, rings and whatnot that can protect his family, or just being around him might have that protection. But it still comes down to the threat's still there until you finally take him out. So does it mean basically, here we go. from this point on, it's go after Man God. Like, next step after Man God. Quick as possible. Before he finds out and puts something into play to come kill his family. But yeah, super hype. Super excited to see where this goes from here. But yeah, that is chapter 8 and 9 of Mushoku Tensei. Hope you guys enjoyed this Mushoku Monday. As always, thank you so much to the chat for dropping by. Hope you guys enjoyed this premiere. Additionally, before you leave, make sure to hit that like button. I greatly, greatly appreciate your guys' support, your kind words. And yes, as per usual, greatly, greatly, greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel monetarily through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, memberships, all that kind of stuff. I really appreciate it. It means so much to me that you guys are willing to part with your hard-earned money in order to support this channel and keep things going. But until the next Mushoku Mondays, y'all take care. He noticed something about the tone of Orsted's voice.
And restore your arm. And I restore your arm to its original condition. I will hunt you down and make you...
Eris, that's my job to protect... Eris. Wow, lost that one. Orsted followed up by slicing barehanded strike. Orsted followed up with slicing barehanded attack. Orsted followed up with a slicing...
Eris boyish gray rat speaks...
After bringing his sword to his room. Be more powerful then. In her hand, she held a sword with a silvery bright... In her hand, she held a sword with a silvery bright... In her hand, she held a sword with a silvery blade. Silverly blade. Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to yet a... way back in volume. The force left his body stunned. The force...